Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks for joining me today. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, the heart-centered connector. Effective communication is at the heart of every connection I make, and it has to be at the heart of every workplace for people to thrive. That's why my company, GrowStrongLeaders.com, sponsors this podcast. We are on fire about getting our exceptional books and tools into the hands of millions of people in the workplace. You can learn more at GrowStrongLeaders.com. Today is so special. I am just thrilled to bring to you Dr. Bridget Cooper. Welcome, Dr. B.
Hey, Meredith. It's so good to be here with you. I was so excited about this.
Well, I have been for weeks, Dr. B, and I want to first give a shout out to Tom Perrone. He's our mutual friend and colleague who originally introduced us, and we have formed such a close relationship. I'm just so thrilled to bring you, your story, and your expertise to my audience. And before we get into our conversation, I want to share a little bit more formally with my listeners about who you are. Dr. B is, in my opinion, an extraordinary human being, and I think you'll conclude the same thing as you listen to her today. She endured unthinkable physical, emotional, and sexual abuse from infancy into her teen years. She overcame incredible odds to become a powerful voice for living fully, no matter what adversity you've had in your past. She's the best-selling author of 6 books, including Little Landslides. The wrong book, Little Landslides, which is her personal memoir of rising up through trauma. And she has created a proven process for being a pain rebel, empowering clients around the world to reclaim their power and peace. And our conversation today is going to center around this process that she's created, which she describes in her latest book, Pain Rebel: How We Take Our Power Back. Now, Dr. B, I've given such a tiny sliver of who you are. Will you tell us a little bit more about the journey to the work you're doing today with your clients?
Thank you. Yeah. How do you encapsulate a life story in 30 seconds, 30 minutes, 30 hours, right? We've all had so many twists and turns in our own journeys. And you did a beautiful job kind of tipping your hat to the fact that, I call it raised by wolves, and, born onto the welfare system and getting to where I am one broken fingernail at a time. And I think that where I have come from has given me this passion that underscores everything that I do with each one of my clients, because I see what unresolved pain and the complications that come from so many of the traumas, big and small, that we've all endured in our lives can have on the ways that we live, that we communicate, that we love, that we earn, all of the parts of our lives. And so for me, having seen what pain can do in the hands of people who have not resolved it, faced it, wrestled with it, tried to make them better, causes pain to other people. So my mission, my purpose in life is to alleviate pain, to reduce its impact on everyone. That domino effect, that butterfly effect that happens when one person hands their pain to others. So, in my work with, whether it's companies or individuals, I'm always looking to find where they're being held back from the beautiful, amazing life that they were meant to live before something, someone, or somewhere, kind of took them off course.
Mm-hmm. It's so powerful, because as I was listening to you, I was just thinking about in the workplace when someone has a boss who is toxic in one form or another, that boss's behavior is coming from a place of pain.
Right.
There's just so many areas in our lives that you have learned firsthand
Yeah.
about how do I kind of dig in and find out, how to help people live more fully. In fact, I love the phrase you use to refer to yourself as a cage rattler. Tell us how that came to be, and what do you mean by that?
So funny. So I was working with a colleague and kind of mentor, and she said to me, what do you do? And I said, I'm a consultant, I'm a coach, I'm a facilitator, I'm a keynote speaker. And we both were falling asleep as we listened to those, words, because they just, I am all of those things. But they didn't do the kind of energy that I bring to, a conversation or an event. They didn't do it justice. They didn't really speak to that burning passion that just emanates from me when I'm talking with people and when I'm doing the work that I do. And I was driving one day. When I do my best work, I really need someone in my passenger seat at all times taking notes. So some people, it's the shower. For me, it's the car. And I was driving and I thought, cage rattler. I rattle people's cages. Like, people are stuck in cages. Back to that Hotel California, that we always have the key to let ourselves out of the room we've locked ourselves in, but we don't know that we have it. We're just looking at the walls, examining, the floors, checking out the furniture. And we just think that that's where we are, where we're stuck, where we're meant to be. And what I do is I rattle the cage of people in that self-imposed, oftentimes, entrapment, to be able to let them know, here's the key. This is how you get out, and allow people to be awoken. I talk about in my 5-step change process, the very first point is awareness, that we have to have awareness of where we are, of how we're stuck. And I try to increase that awareness to therefore increase the number of choices that we have available to us to be able to deal with the problems that are in front of us, and therefore increase our personal power, because awareness equals choice and choice equals power. Mm-hmm. So that cage rattler is built on the foundation of increasing that awareness, of getting people to understand better why they are where they are and how they can get out if they want to get out to a different place.
Mm-hmm. I love that equation you set up. And I would love for you to go a little bit deeper in that. So awareness equals choice, and choice equals personal power. Talk about the meaning of that, how you came to put that together.
So it was just basic observation. I'm studying. One of the things that happens and can happen, I guess, to people when they've grown up in chaotic, unsafe environments, is they're always looking out for, trigger points, flashpoints, things that are going to disrupt that next moment. Is that person a little more irritable than they were before? Do you smell any alcohol in their breath? Like, all of those subtle little environmental shifts that make the environment, provocative, right? And so for me, I've been studying human behavior since jump. So in studying people, I noticed that when people are aware, when they become aware of things, when we're like looking around, and just like, think of driving. When was the last time you drove one place to the other and you don't even remember the route? Like, you just got to your destination and you had no awareness of the actual moment you were in, or little awareness, obviously some, or you wouldn't have been able to make that road. But when we increase our awareness, we start noticing things. We start noticing, the birds in the trees, or the people on the corner, or the way that house, that color changed or something. And when we start noticing those things, we can make choices. So maybe we wouldn't have taken the regular route to work if we'd been more aware and seen ahead and looked down a road and saw that way didn't have as many cars. We might have been able to have more choices about the route that we took. But when we're just on autopilot in our own lives, we don't see those choices. We don't see the things they're actually available to us. So becoming more aware of where we've come from, how we got to the place that we got to by natural consequence of all the decisions and events that took place before this moment, we're able to then see more choices. There's no have to. So I tell my kids this, they laugh at me sometimes, but I'm like, there's nothing you have to do. They're like, well, you have to pay taxes. I'm like, no, you don't. You just have some pretty dark outcomes if you don't, but you don't have to. And they said, you have to breathe. Nope, you don't. You don't have to do anything. There's nothing that you have to do. So when you become aware of all the ways in which you're making decisions each and every day about lots of different things, the relationships you're in, the job you're occupying, the house you live in, the foods you're eating, the way you're exercising, how you're speaking to yourself and other people, you recognize that we are making like a million choices a day. And we get to be aware of those. The more aware we are, the more that we can exercise some of those different choices that lead us closer to the outcome that we're looking for. And that increases our personal power. That allows us to be able to make those choices more consciously, more intentionally, more passionately, more powerfully.
Mm-hmm. Those are all three really great points. And I would love for folks to just be thinking about where am I in that process? Where could I increase my awareness in order to make better choices so that I feel more in power around this particular area?
And so much of it, Meredith, comes from this, there's been this huge movement to mindfulness, and people used to think it was like this woo-woo science of people just sitting around on yoga mats, and burning incense and things. But what we notice and what we know about from the research is that mindfulness creates physiological changes to our brain, to our body, to our stress levels, to our cortisol levels, like all sorts of things actually happen when we start getting more mindful. And what mindfulness really is, in my experience, is increasing the space between moments. It's saying, we're just moving from one moment to the next, never thinking about how we're getting to those moments, with really any full mind. But when we're able to slow down time and to really take a pause in between moments, that's when we have more choice. When we're just doing things just reactionary and not thinking that we have any choice or thinking that we must do something, we're not using that space between moments to be able to consider what our other options are. So mindfulness, if you're thinking like, how do I get more aware? How do I look at that? You read, you listen to podcasts like this, you talk to experts like you and me, you can increase awareness in a lot of different ways. But one of the ways is really to be able to increase that space between moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was one of my favorite lines in your book, Slow the F Down.
Slow the F down. Yeah. That too. I mean, that's a little less woo-woo. That's a little more,
well, it's sort of like slapping you in the face and going, okay, pay attention to this. This is important. And it is, because I would guess many of my listeners are sort of like I am, more human doing than human being at times. And so moving from thing to thing without taking that time to pause when something happens before we react. And I liked the fact that you emphasized it doesn't have to take a lot of time.
No.
Sometimes it happens very quickly, but it's the fact that we do wait for a moment, just to see what shows up. And I think, isn't it true too, that it helps us get in touch with, once we're raising our awareness about things, then I know for me, when I do take time to slow down, I've got this moment where I think about, okay, so what's triggering my reaction? If I'm thinking, man, I want to come out and say this, or, respond to that. If I slow down long enough to say, all right, what is behind my doing that? It makes a huge difference in what I actually say or do next.
Correct. Because you take that moment to increase your awareness about what's motivating the emotion that you're about to take action on. I say this to my clients all the time. If you feel anything between your gut and your forehead, if you have a sensation, a heat, a tightness, a rigidity, a palpitation, if you feel anything in that area, move away from the computer, roll your chair back from the desk, put your hands on your legs. Do not touch that keyboard. Do not pick up that phone, because then you're operating out of pure emotion, which is often not the best instructor for long-term outcomes, right? It's, you're going to feel good in the moment, right? Like I got them, but then the outcome that you're actually looking for. And I ask people this, my coaching clients, what do you actually want? I've coached people through, divorce actions and, all sorts of personal, struggles and leaving companies and, coming into companies. And I ask them, tell me in 2, 5, 7 years, what is the story you want to be able to tell about the time between now and then? What's the story? And when they tell me the story, I ask them the simple question, what is what you're about to do to build that story? Does it build it? Does it make it impossible? Does it make it harder? Does it make it easier? That's how you know you're making the right action, is by living by the story that you want to be able to tell about that next passage of time, and creating actions, following actions that actually build you toward that.
That's great. So let's talk about the word should, because it ties in. When you were talking about have to, I thought, yes, I've got to come back to this, because I felt that in Pain Rebel, you gave the best description of the word should, because we all hear that, don't use the word should, but you gave a good explanation of why not, both from shoulding on ourselves and shoulding on other people. So please talk about that. I think it's so important.
Here's the thing, I remember back in the day, toxic shame, was the big, bandwagon everyone was jumping on, and talking about how don't should on yourself was another, I felt like everybody had a button that said, don't should on yourself. And I thought about it, I was like, yeah, that sounds really nice. But a lot of people get real practical, right? And they're not into that, emotional growth place. So, I am going to, shoulding all over myself. I don't get what that means. I think about it very practical terms. If you are saying the word should, what you're saying is, I have an expectation. I have an expectation that someone, myself or other, is going to behave, respond, do something in a certain way based on my expectation, which is the most powerless position anyone can hold. Because having an expectation has no weight behind it. It has no muscle to it. It's simply this thing that we get to sit on high about and, wag our fingers and say, you should have done that, which creates shame in us if we are the person receiving the should, or shame in other people. But it doesn't inspire action. What it inspires is resentment toward us, toward ourselves, from other people toward us, and shame. If instead we replaced the word should with the word want has power in it. Want has energy behind it. Want has something to motivate us to get to something, because it's a want, right? When I want an ice cream cake, I'm going to go find an ice cream cake. If I think I should have a salad, I don't know, maybe I will, maybe I won't, but it's probably not going to taste very good when I have it, because I did it because it was a should versus a want. So I have to ask myself, do I want this? Maybe I don't want the salad in the moment, but I want the outcome from the salad. So then all of a sudden, I'm not saying I should have the salad. I'm saying I want the salad because I want the outcome that's going to come down the line. The other thing that want does when we're talking about a transaction, a person-to-person experience, is should is this silent judgment, judge, jury, and executioner, all wrapped up into one, promoting that level of like resentment and shame that does nothing to build a healthy relationship. But if I want something from someone else, I'm inspired to make a request, to try to get to an agreement, to try to get someone to agree with me that they will do that. If I think my friend should show up to my party on time and they come late because they're going to be, as my mother would say, late to their own funeral, and I get angry with them, that seems kind of lame, right? If I think someone should do something, but if I get them to agree to it and they don't do what they agreed to do, then there's an accountability. Then there's an accountability that can be influenced, that can be negotiated. It's really an exercise in boundaries, to be honest. When we talk about boundaries, it's about saying, I can should all day long and get nothing, or I can want for a hot minute, make an agreement and hold somebody and myself accountable and responsible to the agreement that they made, not the expectation that I held.
Mhm.
So it's really all about power and influence over getting the outcome that you actually want versus doing it in just a roundabout, backwards, toxic way that doesn't get you any closer to the outcome you were looking for.
Mm. That alone is a huge nugget and takeaway for my listeners, because there are so many times when all of us have these unspoken expectations. We haven't even told the person, what it is we would want them to do or like them to do or hope they would do. We just have it in our heads and expect them to read our minds.
Yeah.
And deliver what it is we want. And so we experience all these unnecessary negative emotions because of our own inability to articulate what it is we want.
To own it and to consider for a moment that someone might have a different experience of that same moment. I can't tell you how many times and you talk to people from all walks of life, have completely different ideas about what a formal dinner looks like, or what, on time is, or what someone should bring to a birthday party, or how someone should respond in an open forum discussion, right? We have all different expectations, all different shoulds hanging out there. But if we don't communicate them, and then we try to hold other people accountable to them, that it's just a misfire, right? There isn't that level of common language. But when you get to this is what I want, the other person can say, well, oh, wait a second, that's not what I was thinking to do. I'm glad you told me, or I don't agree. I want to do this other thing. A lot of people find that intimidating because it nudges them into, I have to have negotiation skills. I have to have intentions. I have to hold myself accountable as well. If I'm not just sitting over here in judgment of how other people are messing everything up, right? But it requires that. And when you talk about communication and leadership, it requires that level of vulnerability to be able to have those conversations and talk about those expectations versus agreements so that people can have positive outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I'm thinking about this and just imagining, what is it that people are bringing from their lives that cause them to be hesitant, to just be honest and be vulnerable and express, here's what I want. What do you think are some of the reasons? And of course, I know they're complex.
There's so many.
You work with so many clients. I was thinking, I bet there's some common threads that are behind this hesitation. And how do you help them move through those to be more effective in stating what they would like to have?
Right. So in a lot of families, we get a message, and this is where contracts come up, which I know we'll probably tackle later on in this call, but that we have this idea that comes up from our parents that being agreeable is being good, that somehow nice is desirable. So if we ruffle a feather or, ask for a need to be met, then we're not being nice. Or maybe we got the message that our needs don't matter and we are in service to others. Therefore, we can go ahead and we can be inconvenienced and hold all sorts of resentments and frustrations, but we don't hand those to anyone else because it's our job, because our needs aren't important. Some people are afraid of conflict and confrontation because perhaps they had someone who is very punitive or passive aggressive or something who didn't handle being challenged in a way that let them know that they could challenge something without being seen as being the aggressor. And that goes for men and women alike. Women have sometimes a different nuance of challenges than men do, but I find those common themes in so many of my clients who are struggling, my students who are struggling, trying to figure out how to deal with conflict, right? It's much easier to go to our friend and whisper and, complain about so-and-so, or go home to our spouse and, yell about our boss than to actually risk addressing the issue. Because often what happens when we address an issue, quite frankly, is when we bring up an issue, guess what's going to happen on the other side? The other person might have an issue with you. But if you just sit back in your silent resentment and you feel like, I am on high, I'm right, I have all the reasons why this person's being an absolute impossible jerk, you're never confronted with the idea that maybe you've been kind of difficult yourself. Maybe you've been hard to read. Maybe you haven't been addressing things when they happen and you've been holding all these things back. And then all of a sudden you just throw it all at them. And they're like, whoa, like where was all this stuff for the last 2 years? You could have talked to me about that. So there's also that the more we delay, the more that we resist going forward and having the conversation, because all of a sudden now we're vulnerable to criticism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just think of different situations in past workplaces and realize, the universality of what you're saying and how challenging it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because most folks are not raised in a home where there is this open communication, where challenge is encouraged.
Right.
Because of that need to be the authority figure and the impact that has.
Right.
Over the years. You mentioned contracts. I do want to go there because I think it's such a key element of your book and of your process. So let's define what you mean by contract and then look at old versus new. What do you mean by those?
So when I work with people and trying to kind of get that level of awareness of why it is that they're doing that same question you asked yourself of why am I having this reaction? What am I feeling about this? It's that same level of inquiry that I'm going to with my clients. And I'm finding out that what they have is a belief, usually about what they should be doing or what other people should be doing. It's all these expectations about how things are supposed to operate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if love means suffering, loyalty means, not voicing opinions. If I'm loyal, then I'm good. If I work, 80 hours a week, then I earn the right to have wealth, right? Like there's all these ideas that we have about how we're operating in the world, how we're operating with one another that come from some of our very earliest experiences when we were too young to really consider whether or not that made any sense for our own success, happiness, productivity, health, any of it, right? We just took on the belief because it seemed to make sense in the situation that we were in, whether it be really abusive or fairly healthy, but just ripe with all of these messages that we get about the definition of good, the definition of loyal, the definition of responsible, the definition of success, the definition of happy, the definition of anything, right? So I started thinking that, people have a much harder time when I tell them, you believe that, but that's a bad belief. Then people just come back at me with, well, here's all the reasons why it's a good belief, right? So I don't do that. That would be, silly to do it that way. But I started thinking, how could I get people to see that what they decided to believe back then made sense because it held them in the inclusion of their family system and in their friendship system and in their, community. But how they agreed to believe then was not informed by current understanding of what actually makes a good life. Taking that belief and making it extreme and without question and black or white is not serving them. And I thought, well, contracts, because people know what a contract looks like. And you have to be at least 18 to sign a contract to have it be legally binding. And when you have a contract that's BS, that doesn't make any sense, that, benefits other people, you do a Taylor Swift and you record your own music and you start making more money than, your record label's making, right? So we understand what contracts look like, and they're tangible, they're pieces of paper, they're things that we can look at and evaluate and say, is this fair? Is this right? Is this just? Is this profitable? And we can say, I want to sign that contract. I don't want to sign that contract. So I named them contracts. These beliefs that we got and that we held on to from a very young age that have been like the operating system in our computer of life, and said, what we need to do is we need to evaluate what those contracts are. What is the message that we are believing that is precipitating our behavior? And how can we look at that contract and evaluate if we really think it belongs here now? Mm-hmm. Does wealth have to mean bodily sacrifice? maybe not. Maybe it doesn't need to mean that. Maybe we need to redefine that contract that we've signed. And so that's where the name contract comes from. And I look at the old contracts as being the things that we've been holding on to, unexamined, unchallenged, just letting them operate our lives. And new contracts are the things that we decide in replacement of those contracts to lead a better, happier, healthier, more successful life in the way we choose to define those constructs, not the way that they may have been presented to us. Again, some, intentionally and unintentionally. I mean, I don't know how many people have had siblings who, if you ask them, and I ask this all the time when I'm in a group and I say, okay, how many of you have siblings? Most people raise their hands. How many of you, if I asked your sibling what it was like growing up, would have a very different answer than yours? And everyone chuckles and says, yep, here. Because people can live in the exact same household with the same parents, the same pets, the same four walls, same cars, and come up with different contracts. I could study humans for the rest of my life and not know exactly all the reasons why that's true. But it's not about blaming our parents for giving us bad contracts. It's about understanding that we, in our limited awareness and understanding of life, when we sign these contracts, took on this contract and have made it ours now. And now that we are adults, now that we do have that power and volition, it is our responsibility to change them to better serve us and the world.
So good. So talk about an example or two of a client where gives us a picture to make it more concrete.
Yeah.
What was an old contract? And then what was the new one? And also, how did they make that shift from the old to the new? Because that's a change and that can be challenging.
Right. So I'll give you, so I had a female exec. She was incredibly competent technically. In a leadership way, she struggled sometimes because she did not make her voice known. Public speaking, speaking up at meetings, being able to speak her mind and be assertive, not being aggressive, but being assertive. And this is a common issue. We went back and we started looking at her contracts and we realized she was raised by a military parent who was very clear that you spoke only when spoken to. And even in that, frame, it was quiet, respectful, and never challenging. Like she would never think to challenge her parent. So when it came time at work to do those things, her contract was you speak when spoken to, right? And that you don't confront leadership, right? Like whoever's in charge, they're right. No matter if they're right or wrong, you don't question them. They're right. And she'd just been thinking she was just being, she was shy or she wasn't confident enough or she had, imposter syndrome. She was writing up all these other definitions to it. And we went back and looked at that contract. She was like, oh, right. I totally have. That's how I've been my whole life. That was the figure I had. That's what I brought forward with me. And we looked at it and said, well, what contract would serve you better? And she was like, I respectfully challenge leadership for the good of myself and others. Like, that's the contract I want to sign. I was like, that sounds like a much better contract. And she started talking up in meetings and not like confronting and being aggressive or mean spirited or having a lack of respect, but having a greater respect for the value of her own voice that had been self-silenced for so long. Mm-hmm. And her career made huge improvements. She was becoming the mover and shaker that she was always bound to be based on her technical expertise and her ability to, read a room and have insight into people, but she just wasn't using her voice in a way that served her.
Mm. That's very powerful. And it sounds like, one of the key things goes back to that whole thing you said about awareness.
Yeah.
And having a guide like you that helped them see what that current behavior was, how it was not serving them and what would serve them better. I love that new contract.
So what was bound to happen if we hadn't run across the contracts, construct, what was bound to happen, and it happens to a lot of people, like going back to the same diet over and over again, not losing the weight and thinking that you're flawed, right? Well, maybe it's the diet. Maybe it's not fitting your, metabolic construct. Maybe it's not fitting your lifestyle. Maybe you're allergic to, one of the food groups that's in it. Who knows? Is that she would have kept taking, confidence building classes, and she would have kept doing, like more and more things to try to cover what was out here versus what was behind. It's kind of like she kept getting new screensavers, and she kept putting on new, other software onto her computer, but she wasn't fixing the hardware. And that's what the contracts do, is it goes back into the hardware system and it decodes that code to be able to say, that's not the code that works to be able to support all these new programs, all this, joy and abundance and happiness and success and relationships and all this. So you got to go back and you got to decode back there. And that's what I'm trying to help my clients do, versus trying to feel, even because what they end up doing is they feel more and more shame that, well, I took that public speaking class, or I went to Toastmasters and I still don't feel, there's still something holding me back. Well, yeah, your code is you signed the wrong contract. You just got to go back, see what the contract is, figure out the new contract, and find new behaviors that are consistent with the new contract versus the old contract. Something my clients and I do every time we call, and we have a call and we talk about the update from the week. If they tell me something that went poorly, 99 times out of 100, when I turn to them and say, which contract? And they're like, oh, it was the old contract on this thing. Like, they can start to diagnose their entire life based on where they're still abiding by old contracts and where they're abiding by new contracts. And everything changes when they start abiding by their new contracts. So
that's so cool. So my question then is, for someone who is interested in finding out what are their old contracts, what are some questions they could ask themselves, or talk a little bit about your process for helping them do that.
Yeah. So first I honestly, for listeners who may, somebody, maybe they're getting a call right now, they're going to jump off this podcast. I don't want to leave them hanging. They can always grab a copy of Pain Rebel. They can, just cut through all the stuff in the beginning, get to the stuff on contracts, and there's a huge guide on it. But really how the diagnosis process typically goes is somebody comes to me and they tell me a problem they're having. And what I think of is that there's an operating system, and our operating system is our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, right? So we have thoughts that lead to our feelings that lead to our behaviors. So when we're thinking that the world is against us, we're going to feel sad and angry, and we're going to operate in the world in a sad and angry way, right? So what I'm looking for is, where is the broken thought that's leading to more broken thoughts, that's leading to the feelings that they're having, that's leading them to have more limited behavior choices, right? So when I ask them, all right, what's troubling you? And they tell me what their challenge is. I look at every problem that somebody has as a symptom of the greater issue, right? They're coming to me with a fever and pain and body aches. I'm not like, oh, you have fever and body aches. Good for you. Okay, here's what you can do. You can have, some, I don't know, massage cream and, lay down with some Tylenol. No, I want to find out what's underneath it. So I'm looking at what is the thought that they're having, the belief that is underneath what's motivating them to have this problem. So that's where we're heading. And as soon as I find out what belief, like what are you saying about yourself in that behavior? Like when you have this, I had a client who used to, yell at his staff. Okay, so what is the belief that you have when you walk into that room that is inspiring you to be angry with them? And he'd say, well, they're letting me down. They're not doing their jobs. Okay, but what's behind that? Like, what are you believing about them and about you that they're letting you down? They don't respect me. Okay. And then we keep digging. We dig until we find the belief that they have about themselves and the world that is operating underneath all the other coverings that we have about things. And once we find that, and they look at it and they go, holy hell, I don't want to have that belief. That's really that's self-defeating. That's so disempowering. That's so destructive and disruptive. Then we can figure out, how do they draw up a new contract for those same kinds of behaviors that leads them in a completely different feeling and action realm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So empowering. And
so empowering.
So thinking about the book Pain Rebel.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about because we're going to be wrapping up and I want to encourage people to get a copy of the book. What's behind the title of that? What are those two words together meaning for you and what you want your readers to get from the book?
I love that you asked this. So I believe that we have a broken relationship to pain, that people think that pain is bad. We have a society, a culture that runs from or sinks in pain. We're in one of two places and often simultaneously of trying to get away from it and also living with it as our badge of honors, this thing that I'm always in pain. This is always troubling. You know, try telling somebody at a water cooler conversation, good news. Everyone will look at you like you have three heads because everybody came there to complain and moan about the terrible things that are going on in their job and their business, with their clients, with their boss, with their subordinates, right? So we have this way that we look at pain as being this terrible thing, this awful thing that we have to suffer through, and therefore this thing that we have to somehow placate with drugs or sex or work or, you know, whatever that might be that kind of takes us away from really feeling it. And what Pain Rebel talks about is having a rebellious attitude toward our concept and construct around pain, to see pain as teacher, as informant, as gift and guide, to be able to know if we have a pain that there's something that isn't working in the way that we're thinking about our lives and they're feeling within our own skin and how we're behaving in the world. And there's a way to fix it. There's a way to change it, but we have to be willing to see it, to own it, to feel it, to know it, and to not see it as the end point, but only as the beginning point, as the touchstone to get to another place. And for me, having been through, you know, as I said in the beginning, my own pain and seeing how pain transmits, how hurt people, I want to get people to a place where they're seeing pain as that informant, that teacher, that guide, so that they're not holding on to it and building a life of misery, disappointment, and crutches around it, and therefore transmuting it to other people who are then going to have to do much of the same.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I want to wrap up with getting you to talk about a distinction that I think is really important for folks who have experienced pain in their lives, the difference between wounds and scars.
So there was a wound is something that's, if you think about it, right? A wound is something that's open, festering, open to infection, you know, in looking for a healing process, right? Has not yet healed. It is fresh. It is open. And then there's a scar that says, oh, I've been in this place where I've had a wound, but it's healed over. I'll always know that it happened because I have a scar to remind me of it, but I don't feel the pain inherent in that original injury. So when people are walking, I call them the walking wounded, are the people who have never done the work. And sometimes it's just, they didn't have the right guide or they had the wrong contract signed or whatever that is, but they're walking around with these open wounds. So anyone who comes anywhere near them, you know, how it feels if you've got an open wound and somebody pokes you in it. Yikes. If you've got a scar and somebody pokes you on it, not a big deal, right? I mean, maybe there's a little bit of residual something because there's scar tissue underneath there. So you feel it a little more, you know, concentrated in that one area, but you're not all of a sudden just blown out emotionally. But if you're walking and you haven't done the work to be able to heal those wounds into scars, then anything that touches you is going to create more pain and more excuse to act in a pain impetus way, right? So I look at trying to help people look at those wounds and be able to heal them into scars. Again, having the respect for having traveled that journey, but not living in the wrong time zone by living in the past moment where they were wounded and not being able to carry that forward to the present and the future.
Oh, well, I have to just get you to talk for a moment about that before we wrap up. And that is that whole thing of past, present, future. And how we do rob ourselves and what happens when we haven't resolved the pain from the past.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk for hours about that, but I'll give a quick, I call it time zones. Cause again, I like to think of things in very practical terms. I talk in very practical terms. We live oftentimes in the wrong time zone. The only time zone we're actually in, whether we be in Pacific, Eastern Standard, wherever you might be, the only time zone we can actually be in and have any power, instrumentality, anything is in the present. But most of us are living in the past with regrets, with, oh, I wished I'd done that, or I can't believe I did that, replaying moments over and over again, like we could somehow edit them in our brains. Like, wait, no, let me be the director of this moment a different way, and I'll say this other thing. Or doing the very same thing about the future. I mean, how many times have we stood in the shower and thought, so I'm going to have this conversation with this person, and I'm going to say this, and they're going to say that, and then I'm going to have this zinger, and then they're going to have that zinger, and then I'm going to get the best of them. And we orchestrate these whole things, but we don't actually pay attention to the moment that we're in, which is where all of our power resides. So if we don't go back to the past for a moment to be able to resolve some of the wounds of the past, so we stop bringing them into the present and the future, we can't fully live in the present to be able to take the gifts and the pains that are just part of this human existence, and then go into the future in a way that is intentional and carry with it the kind of passion and purpose that we were put here to design.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
The book, Pain Rebel. I highly recommend anyone who's listening who's experienced any pain in your life, which is all of us.
All of us.
Pick up a copy of this book, because Dr. B is just an amazing writer. First of all, I acknowledge what beautiful writing you do. It just flows. It's so conversational. You'll feel like you have your own personal coach talking to you through the book. And there are so many specific questions and strategies that you map out. You've given us just a taste of it today, and it was all wonderful. Thank you so much. So please let my audience know how they can connect with you, how they can learn more about the services you offer, your books, and your TEDx talk, which was excellent.
So all of that, you can find everything on my website at drbridgetcooper.com. But I love people to connect with me on whether it's LinkedIn, Dr. Bridget Cooper, or on Facebook. I love, and on Instagram as well, Dr. Bridget Cooper. Or you can reach all of my books on Amazon, and also looking up Dr. Bridget Cooper. As you mentioned, I've got 6. Pain Rebel is my most recent publication, published last June, I guess. During the beginning of this lovely pandemic we've been in. But I would love to connect with you. And my TEDx talk is also on YouTube, but you can link to it through my website as well. And as a special gift, because I just absolutely enjoy our conversations, I could talk to you for hours, is for your listeners, if they would like to pick up an audio book of audio edition of Pain Rebel, and they can download all of the exercises you talked about, all those questions that I ask. I have a companion guide for those who do the audiobook version. They can email me at Bridget@drbridgetcooper.com, or linked through any of those social media avenues, and send me a message, and I will give them a free Audible link to be able to listen to the book on audio. So now they can actually hear me in their heads, and not just pretend to hear me in their heads by reading the book. But if they want the print version, that's fine. They can get that for themselves. But I've got the audio, some audio tags for them if they'd like to do that.
Oh, excellent. Well, I hope that listeners who are interested in learning more will definitely reach out to Bridget at drbridgetcooper.com. Bridget, it's such a pleasure to talk to
always.
you. I just love our conversations. I love who you are, who you have become, based on, just knowing all the things, the challenges, the, abuse, just all of it. And you have emerged as this remarkable human being out to really have a positive impact in the world. You're such an inspiration to me and so many. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free facilitator guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.